Guys, welcome to another episode of Guts and Glory World War II podcast. Okay, so, Chapter 11, Sobibor, Escape from Hitler's Death Camp, Sobibor, Poland, October 14th, 1943. We must get rid of the SS officers, and this should take 1 hour. If we could do it in less time, so much the better. For that purpose, we need efficient and determined men, since one moment's hesitation would be fatal. I know some capable people who can do the job. Capo Brisky, Jewish prisoner at Sobibor. When the Red Army Lieutenant Alexander Perchesky became a prisoner of war just 10 days into Operation Barbarossa, he had no idea that his World War II nightmare was just beginning. Before the Germans came rolling in and started breaking everything, Sasha Petrusky was a pretty average guy. He was a 32-year-old bookkeeper and part-time composer who had written some cool piano and violin jams that were performed in his home village of Rostov-on-Don, Russia. He had a wife and a young daughter, worked hard, and led an ordinary existence that didn't involve fighting for his life or trying to kill Nazis with a hatchet. All that changed in 1941, when the bookkeeper and amateur songwriter was conscripted into the Red Army to help fight off the German invasion of Russia. Perchesky was given a uniform and a rifle and thrown into combat on the front lines as a basic infantry officer. He fought to defend his homeland for 10 days, but when the Blitzkrieg encircled and captured Minsk, his unit surrendered and he became a German prisoner of war. Now, the Germans are pretty notorious for not being especially kind to their Russian prisoners of war, and vice versa, and for the next 2 years, Lieutenant Petrusky endured a miserable existence imprisoned in a POW camp right in the middle of downtown Minsk. Food was scarce. Brutal torment. Ooh, I lost the page. Oh, why is this? Okay, the brutal torment. By the guards was commonplace, and the German SS camp commander had a nasty habit of letting his pet German shepherd attack people for no reason at all, shooting them if they hurt his poor little puppy. At one point, Perchesky caught typhus, a nasty disease carried by bodily lice. It gives you fever, muscle pain, sensitivity to light, and vomiting. Since typhus was a death sentence for Russian POWs, the Germans would rather just shoot you and burn your body rather than just give you any kind of medicine. Perchesky somehow kept this condition a secret for over a week in order to survive. The Russian lieutenant was certain things couldn't get much worse. He was wrong. In 1943, it became known to the SS that Sasha Perchesky was Jewish. He, along with 2,000 other Jewish Red Army prisoners of war, was ordered to cram himself into a long train, where he spent the next 96 hours crossing Eastern Europe in a sweltering cattle car packed so tight nobody could even sit down. On September 23, 1943, he arrived at Sobibor extermination camp. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had come to power in Germany on a political platform of hating the Jews. Persecution of Jewish people under the Third Reich began as early as 1933, when Hitler stripped every single person with at least one Jewish grandparent of all their wealth and citizenship, herded them into ghettos, and gave them just enough food to still pretty much starve to death. But this wasn't killing people fast enough for Hitler, so, in January 1942, he authorized the final solution to the Jewish question: the construction of elaborate death camps designed to systematically exterminate all Jews on earth. Sobibor was one of those camps. It's beyond the scope of this book to get too deeply into the horrors of the Holocaust, but let's just say it was almost certainly the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of humanity. If you'd like to know more about it, Ask a teacher or librarian for books and other resource recommendations. Of the 2,000 POWs who arrived at Sobibor, Perchesky was one of just 80 strong-looking, able-bodied men and women chosen to work as slave laborers for the German war effort. The rest were sent to a shower-like facility and executed by poison gas, which was deployed through the ventilation system. Their bodies were then cremated to conceal any evidence of what was going on. An estimated 250,000 people were killed in this way at Sobibor, just the percentage of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who perished during the Holocaust. Sasha Perchesky knew he had to escape by any means necessary, and he had to give everyone else the chance to get free too. It wouldn't be easy. The prisoners at Sobibor were exhausted, overworked, and starving, and the facility itself was locked up like a fortress. There had been an uprising at the Treblinka death camp a few weeks earlier that had set a few buildings on fire, so it was certainly possible, but in the aftermath of that escape, the Nazis had stepped up their defensive. Sobibor was about a half mile from end to end and was home to about 600 POWs plus 30 Nazi SS officers and between 90 and 120 Ukrainian or Polish volunteer guardsmen. It was surrounded by 3 rows of barbed wire, an electrified fence, a deep anti-tank trench, and a 50-foot-wide minefield. Watchtowers, placed every couple hundred feet, were equipped with fearsome MG-34 machine guns. Worse yet, the SS made it very clear that any attempt to escape, even by one person, would result in mass shootings of prisoners. Not long after surviving, Perchesky went up with a Polish tailor named Leon Feldhandler, and together they secretly began planning to break out while they still had the strength to do it. First, they dug a tunnel, but it didn't work out. Heavy rain turned the dirt into mud, and it collapsed. So they opted to go the more direct route, was to kill every SS officer in the camp and walk right out the front door. The cabinet maker's workshop was the perfect hub for their plotting. It was quiet, it had places to hide things, and the second floor offered a good view of the camp so they could watch for guards and plan strategies. Plus, it wasn't weird for a bunch of people to congregate in there, and it kept the guards' suspicions down. The Nazis had many terrible ways of beating information out of you, and if just one person coughed up the details of the plot, it would mean death for everyone involved. Over the next few weeks, people from across the camp worked together to prepare for the uprising. Women and the SS officers snuck up grenades, ammo, and a pistol. Blacksmiths secretly forged small knives or smuggled out wire cutters and hatchets. Other observers documented guard schedules or approached potential collaborators to join the cause. Finally, on October 14, 1943, the plan was ready to be put into action. Feldhandler and Taylor set up fittings for new uniforms for the SS officers. Other craftsmen said that new shoes were ready, or asked SS guys to help looking at a new weapon belt or whatever, anything they could to lure these guys out of the open and into a quiet, closed-in workshop where other prisoners could ambush them with knives and hatchets. All across the camp, no fewer than 10 SS officers, including the acting camp commander, were secretly and quietly taken out, their bodies hidden, and the blood covered up with sawdust. Now was the time to move. Perchesky's men cut the telephone lines and the power to the electrified fence, then lined up as if they were a work detail and headed out for the fence. Just as they were about to get there, they pulled the pistols they'd taken from the dead officers and opened fire, while other prisoners gave a huge yell and rushed ahead with their knives and axes. It was an anarchy. As the leaderless camp guards struggled to react, inmates stormed the weapons arsenal, cut through barbed wire, or simply made a break out the front gates toward the forest beyond. They killed guards with their bare hands or with pistols, scaled walls, and ripped up barbed wire. Machine gun fire from half a dozen towers raked the unarmed prisoners as they ran for it. But Perchitsky and the others who had found rifles did what they could to silence them with accurate gunfire. Many determined escapees were hit by rifle fire or machine gun fire, and still more were killed while trying to run across the minefield. But all across the camp perimeter, fleeing prisoners miraculously reached the relative safety of the forest. Of the 600 people interned in Sobibor, nearly 400 made it out. They left behind 10 dead SS officers and 38 dead camp guards. An additional 30 guards simply deserted their posts and ran for it. Lieutenant Sasha Perchitsky, the bookkeeper turned guerrilla leader, was with a group of about 60 guys who cut through the barbed wire and reached the forest. As the Germans were certainly going to bring up reinforcements to track down the escaped prisoners, Sasha made the decision to split into smaller groups to try and escape the Nazi dragnet. He and a few other folks reached a nearby Polish village where some kind locals gave him food and water and information about the best escape routes. For 9 harrowing days, Perchitsky and a small band made their way through the unfamiliar forests of Poland, hiding during the day and moving under cover for darkness, all the while avoiding German patrols and living off the land for food and water. Finally, after an exhausting trip, they were able to link up with a group of Jewish partisans who were fighting an underground war against the German occupation. Sasha's skills as an infantry officer and his obvious resourcefulness were a perfect fit, and he joined immediately. For the last 2 years of the war, Lieutenant Perchitsky fought as a guerrilla warrior, derailing Nazi trains, setting mines on railroad tracks, blowing up bridges, and bombing enemy barracks. He led hit-and-run raids on supply depots, attacked convoys, and did whatever he could to wreak havoc on the enemy and to make them pay for what they'd done. After the war, a street was named after him in Israel, and he testified at the war crimes trials of 12 Nazi officers, 10 of whom were hanged for crimes against humanity. Of the 400 escapees from the Sobibor uprising, roughly half were tracked down and killed by the SS. The rest went into hiding, joined guerrilla outfits, or simply disappeared. After the disaster at the death camp, SS Commander Heinrich Himmler ordered the camp shut down and the entire complex demolished. Every building and watchtowers blown up, and all the bodies and poison gas were destroyed. While many other Nazi death camps stayed in operation right up until the very end of the war, Sobibor was never used again. The Auschwitz Revolt. The most brutal of the Holocaust death camps was Auschwitz, where over 1 million people were systematically executed. This heavily fortified execution camp was virtually escape-proof, but a woman named Rosa Roboda and other Jewish prisoners working in the camp's crematorium were able to smuggle in bombs, blow up one of the buildings, and incite an uprising against the guards. Several SS agents were killed in the struggle, but ultimately the revolt failed and reprisals were brutal. Rosa was slowly tortured to death by the SS officers over the course of several weeks, but never revealed the names of her co-conspirators. After the war, Polish courts would hunt down many of the men responsible for the camp and sentence them to death by hanging. Horrors of the war. Between military and civilian casualties, the Soviet Union suffered over 20 million casualties throughout the course of World War II. This number is larger than the present-day populations of each of these countries: Chile, the Netherlands, Greece, Portugal, and the Czech Republic. Poland suffered just as catastrophically. In the Warsaw Ghetto alone, over 700,000 civilians died of starvation, dehydration, or illness, or were simply shot in the streets by the Nazis. That number is greater than the number of battle casualties sustained by the entire United States Armed Forces over the course of World War II. European Jewish population, 1939, 9,500,000. 1945, 3,800,000.